Journal, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time are our passionate projectionists. Say hi, passionate projectionists.
Hi, passionate projectionists.
Derek, Ruby, thank you so much for joining me. This is so exciting. It's such a cool addition to the Dome, both of you coming in and adding the projections. But before we dive into that, who are weirder improvers, D&D players or puppets?
Oh, puppets.
Puppets? Okay.
We started, our starting out was doing, the first things I really did projections for was puppet improvised shows that we did in college with our friend and puppeteer who has done puppets for, Dimension 20 did puppets for Burroughs End. And so we've been working closely with puppets forever. And boy, puppets are a fun time.
That's so much fun. Yeah, the crankies for Burroughs End, which are the cutouts. Is that just a specific kind of puppet, or is it just like a whole separate thing? I don't understand a lot of things about art.
It is a specific style of shadow puppetry.
Okay,
and so it is a specific style of shadow puppetry that blends your fixed elements that are on the actual cranky that cranks across that roll of paper that's upright, and then the pieces that you puppet in, like we were doing with the stoats that were kind of like fading in and out. And you get that really specific visual style of things kind of like appearing out of the ether just because of where the physical light source is in relation to the box. Which is why to get that very specific style, we just had to like build a cranky box and do it practically, because it's the only way to really get it to look like that.
Yeah. It was, I mean, obviously, like, super amazing. This is where I'll get to brag for just a second about me, which is I had gotten in touch with you about a friend of mine, Whitney, goes by Smoking Glue Guns, who use some of like the crankies to make dice, and like sent them to Rashawn. Rashawn, of course, fell in love with them because how could you not? But like, it was a really cool moment for me, and I am not a person who has been cool ever in his life. So Whitney texted me and was like, "Hey, I'm driving. Can I call you? I have an idea about something." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And she called and she's like, "I have this idea for these dice that would use like the shadow puppets from Burroughs End, but like the problem is there's no like clean shots of them because the actors are always in the Dome. Do you know like?" Maybe Carlos might have some. And I was like, "Oh, you want to talk to Derek Christensen and Ruby O'Brien?" And she was like, you just know the names? And I was like, not only do I know the names, but I owe Derek and Ruby an email. Like they sent me an email this morning that I haven't responded to. And she was like, "I can't believe," I was like, so anyway, I very rarely get to feel cool. So thank you. Because then you came through huge, and you're like, "Here are the actual crankies that we used. Go nuts!"
Anytime. Always happy to help.
I hope she sent you a copy of those dice as well.
Actually, I have it right here. I don't know if it'll show up. We'll see it.
Yeah.
Sony, focus. Find the center of the camera. Do it. Doesn't want to do it. Do this.
Oh, almost got it.
Hold on.
Oh.
Sony's really good autofocus that I slowed down. Oh. Boom. All right.
Well, for a second, we had it. Yeah. Yeah, and like they glow blue. It's very cool. Yeah. It was a very cool idea, and it turned into a super cool project. And yeah, I get to be a tiny part of it in that I emailed someone about it. I am in no way skilled enough to make the cranky or the dice, but it is really interesting, one of those things of, I mean, obviously being responsible for projections, presumably, like you said, like you started, I don't know about started, but you have been doing projections for a very long time. It's like puppetry in college and like a whole bunch of shows where you've done projections. What is it like projecting onto the Dome, which obviously is not just a flat surface, but, figuring out those measurements? How does that technicality work?
Yeah, that's actually, so the original thing we were brought on to help with for Dimension 20 for any content stuff was just to talk about how to redo their projection systems for the new space. So for the new set that they were building in the new space that you've seen since Burrow's End, which is the in stage 2 area where the dome now permanently lives. They were like, we need to figure out how to do projections better than how we were doing it. Partially because that space is a little bit smaller than stage A. So it was a just technical question of like, physically, how do we do this and fit it into the space and make it all happen? And the answer is a lot of math, and a lot of back and forth working with Rick and the team to try and figure out what exactly we needed to make that happen. The biggest thing being, and it's the thing that I see now and is like the biggest improvement for me, is that the projections, all of the structure of the dome is now on the front of the dome, the side that you see. There is no structure on the back. So all of the back of it is just flat facing material that I'm projecting on, which means you don't get any shadows. Which was always the thing that was the biggest thing I was fighting with the previous dome, because it was built to be the dome first and then projections were added to it. There's all of the wooden beams and everything holding it up on the back, and there's no way to get around the fact that there's cast shadows. So it was a lot of close working and then testing to make sure, okay, if we move the LEDs from the back of it to the front of it, does it still look good? Do we see the LEDs? All of that stuff to be able to merge all of that, and a lot of just millimeters of changing draftings and figuring out exactly how is it going to be constructed until we landed on what the new dome is. And the new dome is walls with a frosted acrylic along the back of it, each in different panels. And each of the player walls have 3 projectors on them, and the DM wall has 2. So you never have a projector on more than 1 or 2 of the kind of vertical strips. And then from there, we just do a bunch of fun projection mapping to reshape everything and make it fit the shape of the dome.
That seems so complicated.
It's both complicated and not. It's actually like, because at its core, it's like, it's still just a bunch of rectangles. So it's actually kind of easier in terms of what projection mapping can be. But there was a lot of math involved, and it is really a game of millimeters, where it is like everything is exactly where it has to be to make it work. And if there was slightly less space, it wouldn't work.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's so funny to think about like how far Dimension 20 has come in terms of projections, and I use that term so loosely in the first projection of Misfits and Magic, where it was literally just like cranked a spotlight on someone in a costume behind the dome so that there was an outline of them, to obviously like full Kate May art on the dome animated, which is wild. Yeah, and also sort of in that line, you're like, when you got brought in to talk about this, I assume how quickly was it that they realized like, oh, you two just need to do this for us?
It was definitely in the first meeting. The first meeting, I started to plant the seeds of like, hey, also content. We do design. So it's the like, we can help talk about like, here's the things that we've done. Here's how we work and how we take the things that you want to do and help tell a narrative with it. And especially the things that are really important to them, which is that it should add something to the atmosphere and the environment without pulling focus or distracting from what's happening, right? And so the really things that are important in theater too, and a lot of the other stuff we do, where the projections are not supposed to be the show, they're supposed to help bring you into it and make it more cohesive and whole. And we talked a lot about that. And again, Kevin Stiller was immediately very interested in that, and Shabak was interested, and then Rick brought us in to talk about it too, and we started working on Ravening War. Was the first one.
Yeah. I know Ravening War and Mentopolis Burrow's End, now we're on junior year. Obviously, not insider information in any way, but like something is currently either shooting or spinning up to shoot, because everyone who lives on Lopez Island is currently in Los Angeles. It's not like a mystery when they've all traveled. But yeah, it is such a, especially like Ravening War, thinking back to Ravening War, those original projections of really, like you said, like enhanced the narrative, enhanced the battle maps of like, oh, we're in the food pyramid. Now here's like our like weird underground projections behind you. How early are you both like working? I mean, how early are you getting like design ideas, stuff from presumably DMs along that way? Since now you've worked with sort of the three big ones in the space. Where are you coming in on that process?
Yeah, it's kind of as early as possible with when Rick starts to have ideas and disseminate them down, and we start to have early meetings. Do you want to talk about that, Ruby?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, so sort of much like the rest of the art team that are all the model builders and stuff, we all sort of work under Rick's kind of creative umbrella and his vision. So a lot of it is a lot of initial meetings with Rick as he kind of facilitates that communication between the DM and then kind of has his ideas about how, and for seasons like this and like Burrow's End, where there are battle maps, a lot of that is him thinking about how he wants to kind of take the battle map and then extend that world into the dome. Whereas for some other seasons, like Mentopolis and like other things that we maybe can't tell you any more details about yet, there are not battle maps. Those are kind of a very different world, but it's a similar sort of starting process where it's Rick's kind of pulling research and thinking about, you know, the style and how to bring whatever world the DMs have cooked up to life. But rather than it being that kind of extension of the battle map, it's much more kind of thinking about how what they call the neutral board can be that anchor that is what's always on the table, and how the projections can then take us from place to place, where the projections in those kinds of seasons, and again, like we saw in Mentopolis, really kind of carry the location a lot more now, because there aren't battle maps, because those are seasons where there's no minis and we could kind of be anywhere. So that's definitely a different and interesting challenge from something like this, where, okay, most of the time we know that what we're doing is creating these battle scenes and we know that we're going to hit those checkpoints of those battles. Those kinds of seasons are much more like we're giving the DM kind of a palette, a toolbox to play with, and Brennan is especially incredible at using that toolbox in ways that we often don't expect. There's moments later in this season where he just kind of pulls things out in a way that's not the reason we made that content, but it is always such a crazy thing of like the player reaction to seeing him use something in a creative way like that, of like, wait, you just had this? You just had this ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, okay. My brain is always like, okay, you said three things I want to ask about. How do I decide the order? One of the things that, like, I mean, Mentopolis specifically, so we'll work past to present. Mentopolis had such a very specific need for projection in terms of a literal, like, eyesight projection of we're seeing what the main character, God, the video delay is killing me. The inside person character of like, oh, there's a grappling hook and a falling out of a window, and all of those things that you had to shoot and map onto that dome. What am I fully misremembering? Derek, is that you in the in that gear? That's what I thought.
Yes,
I had a moment where I was like, I'm pretty sure that was Derek. Yeah. What was it like getting the old grappling hook out and filming those?
That was it was a time. I'm very much a behind the scenes person. I am not a performer, and so I'm always much more comfortable behind the camera than in front of it. And so I avoid at all costs being the person who is in front of the camera. And every other time we can, I find someone else, because it's so much easier for me to direct what it looks like when I'm not trying to awkwardly do it. So there's a really good behind the scene picture I think I posted of what Ruby was shooting, the like wider shots of the grappling gun thing, where I'm just kind of like sitting in a chair and trying to hold myself up and hold my arms up to get the pose right, and just being like, okay, take the picture. Bree stands on a chair above me with a camera with some green screen fabric beneath me, just like, okay, we'll see what this looks like once I composite it together. But yeah, it was just it was a lot of like, okay, what are the ways we can make the things that we want in a way that we can do quickly enough to have it ready and look the way that we want it, because we really wanted to have that kind of more realistic film look to it, that kind of stylized grainy noir film look, as opposed to the really stylized illustrations we were doing in the backgrounds. And so we knew we had to do it practically as much as possible, which is why we led towards taking actual pictures and doing setup. So like in the office, we set up a table and covered it in props and covered it in fake broken glass and took photos of that and took photos of the hands, and same with the falling and all of that. As much as possible was actual pictures, because then it sells it as the real thing that's happening, as opposed to it being completely illustrated.
Yeah it certainly like added a ton to it. And I know, at least like with that season, all the projections were used because the players asked, like, did we miss anything? And I know when I talked to you all about Burrow's End, there's a hint of potentially not all projections were used for this season of junior year, which obviously we can't really get into because we haven't finished the season of junior year yet. But what is it like? I assume you're watching, since you're projecting, that you're backstage, video village somewhere watching. I assume there has to be like a, thank goodness, like in Mentopolis they got to the beats of like of Ruby standing over me in a chair. Thank goodness they made it to he fell out of the window or whatever, or punched his boss, like that like
yes, that was the big one, because that one was a question the whole time, because that was you never know what players are going to do. And so something like that is really a specific, like, how did the players resolve a problem thing, that was the one on Mentopolis that was very 50-50. This one will come up or it won't. And I spent the whole time watching going, we like, are they gonna punch the boss? And was so excited when they did.
Ruby, same general vibe of like, I desperately want them to hit every beat that we have made.
I think so. I mean, sometimes it has kind of varied since then. I think definitely on Mentopolis that was a big one, just because I think everything we did for Mentopolis was so much fun. Whereas I think since then there have been times where it's been a little bit more like, less I desperately want them to hit everything, and more I'm very curious about whether they will and how they might hit everything. Because there have been times more recently where it's been much more like, we have created a huge swath of things to use, and we almost knew for some stuff coming up that it's like, certain things are just like, we're giving you more than we could ever assume you'll work in. So it's, again, a little bit more of that kind of curiosity of like, will this get worked in? How will this get used? Rather than like, I really hope that we get to see that thing. But certainly for Mentopolis, that was a big like, oh, I want this to happen.
I guess sort of speaking of, we made a thing, who knows if it will get used. Let's talk about the vulture in the room. The Vulture Dimension. I mean, I think, Derek, you posted about like how many individual feathers you had to animate. Like what was the mania energy of the meeting where they're like, by the way, we've decided to incorporate the most bonkers thing in the world. How did all of it come together?
Yeah, I mean, that was very much one of those things where they were like, pretty sure it's gonna come up, but having no idea when is the biggest thing. So there was the vulture on the first battle in the Red Wastes. There was a vulture, and we did not have stuff ready at that point, assuming that they were not going to immediately jump on it there. But from every point onwards from there, it was kind of at any point they might or they might not, and no one knows. And so we just have to kind of be on standby in case the vultures come up. And so yes, it was just kind of pitched to us as, this is the Vulture Dimension. Here's how we're trying to handle the players' absolute infatuation with the vulture that was on the set and was not there for any particular reason. So now we're going to intentionally goad them into looking at a bunch of vultures. And Kate did an initial concept illustration of what the Vulture Dimension might look like, and then we went, okay, but how do we animate this then? And we pitched a ton of different ideas. For some reason, the Vulture Dimension is the most nebulous of all things and involved so much time dedication and R&D. And so we pitched like 3 different looks for what the Vulture Dimension looked like, which included one that was just complete chaos of all just feathers, all like rotating and changing size. That was like distressing to look at. And one where it was just kind of the background spinning. And then also I pulled like 40 different heavy metal fonts, and just kind of showed a bunch of different options for like, what do we want the intro animation to look like? And so we spent so much R&D time on the Vulture Dimension, more than basically anything else, for a bit that we didn't know whether or not it was going to actually come up.
Yeah. Oh man. It's so I messaged to Carl because I got to see the episode early. Periodically, I get to see them early, and I got to see that one early. And obviously, I couldn't tell anyone about it, and so I messaged Carlos and I was like, "This is so stupid," and then parentheses complimentary, because all of it was amazing, but I am struck by like that idea. I'm also curious, I guess from a technical standpoint, does Brennan have all of that like on a laptop queued to like a hotkey to, or are you sitting back there and be like, oh no, someone's looking at the vulture, quick, get the vulture files ready?
It's a little bit of a combination of both. So Brendan has basically everything available on the Stream Deck on the table. And as things get more complicated, the Stream Deck becomes more complicated. And so this season had a lot of pages of Stream Deck buttons for all sorts of different things as the season went on. And so there was a Vulture Dimension button on the Stream Deck ready to go at any point. And we also have a second copy of it over at Video Village. And so if there are times where turns out we've been in the background for a little bit too long and we need to change something, we'll swap it. Or there's a background we should have gone into, and for whatever reason we've forgotten to get into it, we'll kind of take it or make changes. Or again, very rarely, if we think something will be funny, we'll take a cue back there. We'll decide we're going to throw something up. But normally we leave it to Brendan, mostly because it makes it easier, because Brendan knows when the story beats are going to happen and when we should transition into something. And so typically Brendan is making all of those changes.
Yeah. Do you remember how many feathers it was, individually animated feathers?
Oh, it's hundreds per second. It is a lot of, so they ramp in, the intro is especially where there's so many of them because it totally covers the screen. And I think it might be 2,000 per second was what it was generating. And they're all just flying across the screen.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, you've had a ton of incredible cast reactions to a lot of things. Mentopolis, Ravening War, when the first time they're seeing those projections, and obviously Burrow's End, the tons of, but boy, the energy of the Vulture Dimension. What was it like, sort of back at Video Village, as you watch the cast just melt down over a thing that I mean, I don't think anyone could have expected.
It's always so, everyone always has such different reactions, and watching everyone simultaneously and just seeing the spread of it is so much of a joy. It's so much of the fun of everything we do is getting to see those genuine initial reactions, because Brennan is the only one who knows what's coming and everyone else it's a surprise.
Yeah. Ruby, thoughts on on cast reaction.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I mean, it's funny though also that you mention what it's like at Video Village, because when we're back there, there's a lot of what it is like, and this, I promise you, only gets so much worse, is everyone back there trying not to laugh loud enough that it gets captured and not always succeeding. There are definitely times later in this season when you can hear laughter from Video Village, because it was just because the cast is so hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a point later in the season that I was talking about with Shabak afterwards where it was like, if all of the cameras had stopped rolling, we never would have known, because we were all head down on the table crying, trying to be quiet, and not succeeding.
Yeah, I've talked to Kevin Stiller about his time at, like, you know, various shows, and I asked him about like a time that like really made him laugh, and it was Brennan's yes or no monologue on Game Changer, where he was a camera operator at that point. He's like, I just had to take my hands off the camera because I was laughing so hard I was shaking the camera and I knew my footage would be unusable, so I just literally had to stop doing my job and just like leave it on a frame because I couldn't hold on to the camera.
Yes, literally the most props to, at various points, anyone who is doing the DM camera, because that's our operated camera, and is effectively in the dome, is right there, so close to all of the cast, so close to all of their microphones, and needs to keep quiet, does an incredible job every time of not just breaking down laughing, like all of us back in Video Village are doing.
Yeah. I would say, like, I mean, it is one of the real joys, I think, of many of the Dropout shows is when you can hear the crew laughter, because you do, like, it's the, like, obviously performers get that sense of pride of like, yeah, I got, this hit so hard, I got the crew. But like, and like, I think, you know, like we get to feel that sort of at home where we're like, oh yeah, this one was a special joke because the crew could not keep it together. But yeah, it doesn't happen often on Dimension 20. It happens, I would say, in the adventuring parties pretty regularly, where you can hear laughter backstage. But obviously, that's a lot more loosey-goosey stories not happening. But it's very fun that there are sometimes it's coming up in the actual show. Yeah, oh God, I'll never get over the Vulture Dimension, because I guess it was so, everything about it, like Murph saying like, hey, don't do it because like the Grix is almost dead, please just like focus on the thing we're supposed to be doing, and then the fact that it actually paid off, and truly maybe saved them in the fight because it got all of them unstunned and a bunch of things like, yeah, I just magic. And I know, you know, like, but in that fight also we got, I think, my favorite projection of the year, which is the lawnmower, of course. Can you walk me through the lawnmower projection?
Ruby, that was your...
Yes. So there's a file on my computer that is an illustration from Kate May that is called lawnmowerfuckatron.psd. And
oh man, now I know what I'm clipping out for social.
And I spent a considerable amount of time individually animating its arms to wave and its, as Kate May phrased it, hat to wiggle as it rolls across the screen, and getting just right the way that its hat bounces when it hits a bump.
Mhm.
That was many hours of work that I think paid off incredibly and was worth every second and every penny of Dropout's money that they spent on that.
1,000,000% agree. And you didn't just get one time around. Like it went around a couple of times, because that's how you knew you really nailed it. Because Brennan just kept pressing that button to just really, really drive home how upset Zach Oyama was.
Yeah.
Like Gorgug. I assume Zach really enjoyed it. Yeah. It's funny because like we saw in Emily Axford's behind the scenes, Kate's drawing like pinned up to a wall of the lawnmower. And I remember at the time people were like, what on earth could this be? And then so much happened that it kind of like fell out of our memories of just like, oh, here was a weird thing we saw. And then when it came back, someone was like, that was in the behind the scenes. And it was this like wonderful moment of like, we finally have one mystery solved. I can't believe they left this in the behind the scenes and didn't blur it out. But yeah, that, do you know if Kate's drawing came first or if Mini came first?
Kate's drawing came first.
Kate's drawing came first.
They updated the Mini to the drawing and vice versa. So it a lot of things happen really collaboratively throughout.
Yeah, there was
especially
back and
too,
forth.
he is often will do a background before they're finished painting set 2, and so Rick will print out our illustrations and everything and paste them around in the shop, and they'll often paint to match. And vice versa. When they're building something, we'll see what they have, and we'll make adjustments to the projections. And so it's really collaborative.
Yeah, I know when I talked to Kate, she mentioned that the mall fight in her original drawing, the chairs had like bars on them, and then she saw the minis didn't have bars, so she very quickly like erased all of the bars off of her chairs, so that like the background projections matched the actual mini, which is really cool to have like that level of incorporation and collaboration. Is really, the reason why it works so well, as you know, is that it adds that level of immersion for players and people at home when it's literally to the point of like, yeah, these things match. Like there weren't accidents here. I'm sure there are probably some mistakes, whatever. But like, like we made chairs that matched. One of the things also, speaking of Kate, like obviously absolutely stunning art. And one of the things that's really cool is that her art is up on the projection, or it's part of the projections, or are the projections, whatever. But one of the things that's very cool that you added was that those things are animated and they move and like trees blow and things. Can you kind of talk me through that? What is that process like in terms of animation of someone else's art?
Yeah, so a lot of what that involves is it's definitely a lot of kind of communication with Kate and in past seasons with other artists that we've worked with about, okay, we need, these trees need to be on a separate layer, and you need to kind of like, you need to render what's under them where normally, if it's blocked by the tree, you wouldn't draw it. And little things like that. And a lot of it has also been a process of discovery of things like, okay, if we're going to make this tree move, like any lighting that affects this tree also needs to be separated out from the lighting that affects things around the tree that aren't moving, for example. And especially that came up a lot this season because there are a lot of backgrounds that are basically the same background, but with a slight variation. So some of the kind of things that we keep coming back to have a daytime and a nighttime version. And so especially in those two, because it's like, okay, we've added this overlay of lighting to make it feel, like street lamps instead of like sunlight, and figuring out, okay, like we need to layer that lighting in a certain way in order to be able to animate it. And one of the things that has also been really cool about working with Kate specifically in this process is that Kate, much like us, also has somewhat of a theatrical background and has worked in that kind of environment before. And so when we first talked to Kate, like immediately hit it off with her and were able to kind of have that language, because that's very much all kind of that collaborative workflow is something that is very inherent to working in theater, and that like, and it very much so is as well for, you know, TV production and film and stuff. But a lot of people in the entertainment come from, you know, having done theater initially, even if that was just like in high school or whatever. But because Kate had that kind of background of it, I have a very distinct memory of her being really excited actually about getting to work on a project like this, where rather than just delivering a final illustration and it was just kind of her, you know, head down making an illustration, it is kind of that back and forth, and it's that, you know, we're going to do XYZ with what you've given us, and you're going to go back and add this little thing because of what got added to the model, and all of these different kind of steps where it is very like we are all making an end product together, and everybody's work affects each other in a kind of cool cycle that could probably go on forever, but at some point the show has to come out.
Yeah. It's super cool. Yeah, obviously, like, it's also really cool. Obviously, Kate is like a huge fan of the show, and started out drawing fan art. And like, I talked to her about this. It's like, what's it like having people draw fan art of now your official art, having come from a fan art world? And you know, like, coupled with that, Sarah Barrios comes in and does the theme song as a huge fan of the show. Ruby, I don't know if you were also on set for the music video. I know, Derek, you were, because as much as you say that you hate being in front of the camera, boy, you're in every behind the scenes shot.
They sure put me. They got me in a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
I was sure seeing that. Yes, they managed to shoot all of the behind the scenes stuff every time I was there. Was a lot of it. So I noticed that with all of the initial stuff too, because those were the times at which I was stepping in for Kevin Stiller as director of photography. And so I'm in there at Video Village and behind the cameras checking stuff in all of the behind the scenes footage they shot. So I kept seeing myself appear in all of those kind of introductory stuff they released before the season.
That's very fun. Yeah. What was the music video like? First music video you had worked on, or?
I've done a couple of music videos before, and we were primarily we were pitching whether we were going to do projections and lighting or just lighting, and ended up determining we didn't really want to show any of the content from the season yet on the walls at that point. So we decided to do it just lighting, and so I worked with Kevin to kind of set up a live lighting palette for the dome using the new software that we're using for the dome's lighting, which lets us do a lot of really fun things with it, where we have individual control of every triangle.
And really cool that you got to like test that out on the music video, like really put it through its paces of here's we've got a new toy, let's really use it. It turned out obviously like incredibly fantastic. I talked to Sarah as well, and I mentioned like my hope is that Teenage Rebellion makes it onto my like Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year, because 95% of my 100% of my Spotify Wrapped is like just full dad rock. I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point it's just like most of the artists are dead on my list. And I was like, if I could just get a living artist on here, great. My only concern is that because I hear the song every week that I'm not also listening to it on Spotify. So I don't know. We may have to, maybe when the season's over, I'll need to listen to it more.
Yes, much of my listening was pre-Spotify because I just had the track they had sent over to me that I sat there playing on loop while I prepped everything to just ingrain it into me, because we do all the lighting live. So every single one of those hits I'm just doing live. I just sit there listening to the song forever to really build it into me, because I'm performing lighting along with it. So I've listened to that song on loop a lot.
Yeah, I mean, sort of speaking of lighting, Ruby, you talked about this a little bit already, but I just want to say how much I appreciate that even though some things are at night, you can still see them. Because I made a TikTok about this yesterday. I was watching The Bad Batch, and I was like, it's an animated show, and I can't see what's happening. Like like you didn't have to put out a light. It's in a computer. You could just be like, add more. You don't have to buy a new light for it. I really appreciate that I can see everything on the projections even at night. But sort of, what is that lighting process like in terms of how does that all work? I guess I should say.
Sure. It's something that we've spent a lot of time kind of figuring out, and we still adjust constantly on set. And so, because you're dealing with a couple of steps of where lighting gets weird, which is how projectors work versus how much ambient light is in the dome from the performer's key lights. And then you're dealing with the fact that you're capturing that into a camera. So how something looks on your computer screen through the projector and through the camera are three entirely different things. So we make our adjustments to what I anticipate based on previous seasons things should look like on camera, and on the computer screen they look crazy. We distort things a bunch because a large part of it is just the dynamic range is way tighter than it is on your computer screen. So if things get a little bit too bright or too unsaturated, they just blow out to white in camera. And it's the same where if things are too dark, they kind of all just gray out because of the bounce light that's inside of the dome. And so we're actually working in a pretty narrow band of brightness. But obviously we want our illustrations to also look good for outside of the dome's projections usage, especially with like Kate May doing art for things that Post is doing or things that are being posted online. And so we'll take those, we'll modify contrast and brightness and saturation on everything that is going in. And then once we're in the space, we look through every projection through all of the cameras, and I adjust wall by wall what the thing looks like to make sure it looks good in each camera, because sometimes the brightness on one will actually not look quite right on another. And so we really dial in every camera exactly what every background looks like.
That's so intense, but amazing. I mean, obviously, like an incredible like final product. That like I. This is an entirely boring tangent. I write a newsletter for my actual 9 to 5 that goes out to our little, like, I'm in marketing, and in our marketing department I write a newsletter every month, and every month I have I put a bunch of GIFs into the newsletter, and I always choose one show. And then at the end, I like do a little write up of like why I love that show. And usually for a long time, it had been like new shows that I had been watching. And so this month I was like, I'm going to like lean into my like crux of my personality and just talk about like Dropout. And I was like, okay, like it's going to be like a throwaway that, yes, of course they have like the best produced actual play, because my coworkers all know that I'm very much into D&D. So it will not surprise them that like there's a D&D show that I love. But one of the reasons why like it is, I absolutely think, the best produced actual play is because of the art department. That the minis, the models, the sets, and the projections all obviously working together. And there is no question here. It's just y'all do great work, and I'm very appreciative of it. I am curious, with that sort of like fandom thought, were you all fans of Dimension 20 before you came on, or was it sort of a new experience? What were you expecting versus like what did it turn out to be?
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely aware of it. We had watched some of it, but had not watched a super large amount of it. We're huge nerds, and so we also get into a lot of actual play, and we play tabletop games, lots of indie tabletop games too, and stuff like that. But we tend to lean more towards listening to podcasts and stuff like that, just because all of our work is visual. It's a lot easier to work on something while listening to something than watch something while we're also illustrating or editing a video, stuff like that. So we tend to listen a lot more than we watch. But we certainly were aware of Dimension 20. We had watched some of the first season of Fantasy High. During the pandemic, we had started to watch it. And so it was a fun, just kind of connection where I had heard from Raven, because Raven and I had worked together at a tiny theater in a barn in New Hampshire a few years prior, and had hung out into the late hours of night in that barn while I was doing projections in there. And so Raven had reached out to me being like, hey, we're wanting to get more into doing projections, and so we'd love to like get you in to talk about stuff. And I was like, great. And so that was our initial introduction into meeting Rick and the rest of the team, was through this weird tiny theater connection, which was just entirely separate to the fact that we otherwise are huge nerds. And so it's just a great combination of things, of happenstance when we came in, because we are huge nerds and love to make things that huge nerds like. So because we like to make the stuff that we like. So it's a great experience.
Yeah. How has the D20 fandom then been sort of, I'm assuming, I hope good. I'm assuming good. But like, how is that sort of like, that there is, one of the things that I often talk about with the various folks is there is that very intentionality of like in the adventuring parties where they have a list of people that they're going to read who help produce the things. And that feels very different than other, like I can't speak necessarily to theater, but like that there is an intentionality of, here are the artists behind this. Let's make sure we like recognize them. And I think a lot of the fandom also like goes out of their way to find you on Instagram to be like, I want to see your behind the scenes pictures, because like we think that's cool. Definitely there's a big group for it because I do this. So what is your D20 fandom experience been like?
It's great. It was a super weird thing to initially kind of process, the like coming from theater where it is like, when you make something, the whole crux of theater is that a small section of people will see it live and then they throw it away. It gets put in a dumpster and kicked out of the theater, and a new thing comes in and no one ever sees it again, and it's gone forever. And now we do a thing that a lot more people have access to watch, and it stays there forever, and anyone can look at it at any time. And that's a very different thing, which initially was a reaction of, oh god, oh no, anything that now we have a chance to nitpick everything we've ever done and been like, oh, if only we had done it like this. But that is just the artist's reaction to anything where I could work on something forever. And you eventually just have to move on and be like, okay, at least I'm working on the next thing. But then being able to see the reactions, I've only ever seen positive reactions to the work that we've done, and just the excitement around the cool things that people get to see in the dome, the cast reactions. And so it's been a great, really positive experience seeing other people recognize the work that has gone into that and how it improves their experience of viewing it, and just seeing those little call outs, especially when we had a chance to watch things live when they're coming out in the dropout kind of live discussion chat, and seeing people kind of call out the like, wow, this thing is really cool, is always just a little thing where I'm like, yeah, that was really cool. And we had fun doing it. And so it's fun to get to see people's reactions like that in a way that, like, in theater, we never get a chance to see or hear what people's reactions are to kind of our work.
Yeah. Ruby, same general life vibes.
Yeah, it's definitely, I also have, I'm not super active on social media, but what I see is all positive, and it is really fun being in the Dropout Discord when the live, when an episode drops and there's that live discussion and people, it goes from, like a conversation to like impossible to follow number of messages when something crazy happens.
Yeah.
When something like the Vulture Dimension happens.
Right. Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I never participate in those. One, I have a 2-year-old, so like the odds of me watching a show live when it drops are basically zero. But like I find it, I can't. I am not capable of like reading text and trying to watch a show at the same time. Like it's just like I'll miss something in one of the other. So like periodically after a show, like I'll pop in to see like what people are talking about in the Discord. But yeah, like there's 50,000 messages, so I'm just like, all right, what are they talking about 3 hours after the episode is over? Like that's the only thing I can check in on. But yeah, I know like it's been super fun, obviously, like for me getting to do this very weird thing of just like asking people to do interviews. Like I mean, we first got connected because I was putting together the Bros End like production roundtable, and Rick was like, you should talk to Derek and Ruby as well. Like you should bring them in as well. And I was like, yeah, I don't have any way to get a hold of them. And he's like, I'll email them. I was like, great. And so like getting to do this has been so fun, and like it's also for me really fun because I love this stuff a lot, and like finding out that other people also love it, like it is very fun to be like, yeah, let's talk about like I have a Patreon where I post like, hey, this is I'm going to be interviewing Derek and Ruby, like do you have any questions for them? And someone very specific was like, can you talk to them about like what it's like projecting onto a dome, like how do they deal with distortion? And like 3 people were like, yes, I also want to know this. And I was like, great, yeah. It also makes my job easier because then I'm like, here's a question I can pass off.
Yes, I'm always happy to break down the nerd answers. There's some behind the scenes stuff in future seasons where I've talked a little bit more about the system itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's Resolume. Resolume, the VJ projection mapping software, is what's firing everything. It's 3 panels per wall, 2 for the DM. We projection map essentially into rectangles. We're always anytime. Well, I'm happy to talk about any of the nerdy stuff about how the system works.
Yeah, we sit there and play what we call the corners game, where we project a grid, because that's the least forgiving thing to see, where you can really tell, are these squares? And one of us sits there on the computer selecting each like corner point to adjust very slightly, while the other one goes, okay, bottom left 3, right 1. And we go back and forth and literally just kind of adjust it until you can see that grid looks like a real grid and not like a bunch of screwed up rhombuses. And and then if it looks good enough to look good on a grid, then it'll look good with anything else, because grids and text are extremely unforgiving in projections, and pretty much anything else is much easier to looks much better even when it's not 100% perfect. So you kind of go with that like really difficult to get right thing, and then get that close enough.
I guess speaking of rhombuses, tomorrow night's episode, we've got some like very old school, like season 1 Fantasy High projections happening of just like colors on the dome, no maps, at least from like what we saw in the previews. I mean, look, like I said, this isn't getting published till Friday, so this isn't going to spoil it for anyone. Was it just didn't know things were going to Falinel, or is this like an intentional choice that happened?
I think I'm trying to remember back, and I think it was not an intentional, like we didn't quite know where it was happening, or it's because it wasn't the specific battle map. This was a heavy battles season, and so a lot of our projections are based on we're really on the battle maps, and then a couple of generic locations, right, that they're constantly going to go back to, which is the school, the town. And so outside of that, often our bandwidth was just limited in terms of how many
Yeah.
other different locations we could make. And so I'm pretty sure that it was just we knew about it, it was lower on the list, and we just determined we didn't have quite enough time to make a whole new background for that.
Entirely fair. It's just very funny because like as soon as people saw like old school looking projections instead of like the like a beautiful shot of Spire or whatever, people were like, do you think they time traveled? Is it like literally like they went back to the original dome? Like as everything happens in Fantasy High of just like it's got to be an intentional conspiracy. What can we decipher from the minute long preview of next week?
Everything is in fact an intentional conspiracy.
Yes. Yeah. Look, as someone who very recently said that he thinks that Sam Reich is actually Sam Dalton in the season of Game Changer because he looks at his hands and says, "I've been here the whole time," like he doesn't understand his own body. Look, I'm deep in the paint on conspiracies for Dropout stuff. Do you have any favorite projections from this season? Is it Thistle Spring like all the rest of the art department?
Thistle Spring is up there. There's some that are coming up that I really enjoy, and that I talk about in the behind the scenes stuff that'll come out afterwards. Why I enjoy it. But yes, Thistle Spring is just very pretty and humorous. Love a good nighttime look.
Yeah. Ruby, favorites?
Yeah.
Or have we not seen them yet?
Yeah, similarly, there's a couple of things that we won't see until nearer the end of the season that are really cool, and I'm excited for everyone to get to see them. And then also, obviously, Thistle Spring was so much fun. It's the art of it is gorgeous, and then also the robot is the robot.
Yeah.
And I love Kate's art, and everything that she did for this season is stunning. And she works so incredibly fast. It is amazing how rapidly these backgrounds happened. Like, you would not believe the turnaround for when we go from, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and get started on that, to like, here's my sketch, here's the, layout with all the colors. I'm almost done. Is this okay? And you're like, we gave it to you yesterday.
That is the thing that I have learned about the internet. Fan artists, good God, they are fast. It's been 2 hours since the episode up. I have made the entirety of like Thistle Spring Tree and drawn it by hand. It's like, how? But yeah, so it does not surprise me that Kate is that fast. Amazing. Well, first of all, obviously you'll have to come back and talk about those favorites later. I am also planning a production round table at the end of this season as well, because you gotta look, if they're not going to include it on Dropout, I'm going to do it. But yeah, if folks out there wanted to follow you on Instagram where they can see some of these behind the scenes, where can they find you?
Yeah, I am Derek C Design on Instagram, and we also have a studio account that I need to post more things on that is D Purpurea Studio on Instagram, where I should post more of the things we've done.
Yep.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. This has been super fun. I'm so excited for the rest of the season and to see more of the amazing projections this season and seasons to come. It's going to be great. I can't wait. I have never figured out how to end these, so I'm just going to hit stop recording.